Hello, everyone. Oh, sorry, a little bit loud. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming to this evening's event, the Young Lawyers event for Pro Bono Week 2023. Delighted to have you all here, and I'm sure you can all agree that it's a fantastic venue for us to be in for this event tonight. I'm Lauren Guest, chair of tonight's event. I'm an associate in the disputes team at Baker McKenzie, also pro bono coordinator for the disputes team, and obviously a pro bono enthusiast. I've got the pleasure this evening to chair the event and kick it off with a fantastic keynote speaker. So we have Solicitor General Michael Tomlinson, KC MP, who's going to be giving the keynote address. I understand that he also gave an address at this event last year, so clearly very enthusiastic about pro bono. And I understand that he also chairs the Attorney General's Pro Bono Committee. So I'm delighted to introduce him. So if we could all give him a round of applause.
Lauren, thank you so much. There's a great risk about being introduced as a keynote speaker, and that is the impression that a keynote speech is going to go on and on and on. Don't worry, this is not that kind of keynote speech. I was asked last year, it wasn't called a keynote speech last year, it's called just a few words, and I promise to replicate just the few words here today. Lauren, you're absolutely right. What a wonderful setting it is. I am a Middle Templar, and I was a Middle Templar as a student, and here debating in the final of the mooting competition after dinner with all the tables laid out formally. An absolutely terrifying ordeal to stand up after dinner and try and ensure that everyone doesn't just snooze off immediately when you stand up to make your submissions in a rather technical moot. But there we go. This is a wonderful setting, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Can I say thank you so much to the panel for being here this evening? Can I say thank you so much to all of you for being here this evening? The fact that it's here in this room, I think, shows the importance of pro bono work. The work of your committees, because this isn't just one committee, it's several committees, is hard work, and it is ongoing through the year. I know some of that because, Lauren, you kindly mentioned that I chair the Attorney General's Pro Bono Committee, and I see the work that goes on throughout the year, that has gone on throughout my time as Solicitor General over the last 14 or 15 months, and I'm very grateful to you for your support for that. In terms of the Attorney General herself, she is a great fan of pro bono work as well. Both of us had our very first cases were pro bono cases. Mine was a FRU case, Free Representation Unit case. It was an employment tribunal. I'm not an employment barrister, I'm sorry. And I was pretty terrified and nervous turning up to the tribunal. The reassurance that I had was actually, I felt that my client needed me. We got a good result. The client was very, very grateful, and I was very pleased to have been able to help in that small way. And I think this week, this Pro Bono Week, celebrates changing lives through pro bono work. And even in those small cases, the cases that are not international, the cases that are not going to be reported in the law reports, the cases that are not going to hit the front pages, they are important, because they are important to your client. And it's a really good opportunity to undertake that work. Pro bono publico for the good of the public. But I think I think it's also good for us. It's good for each of us that undertakes pro bono work. It's not just good for our clients, it's good for us. It's good for us as a profession. I think it's a great tradition that we have as lawyers, that we have throughout the ages, throughout history. I'd love to see an historical report of pro bono work throughout the ages, but historically, we have always undertaken pro bono work as a profession, and I believe it is good for us, for our standing. It is also good for us to know that we have each other in common, that actually we do more than just work for a living. We work pro bono publico. Now, I'm going to get this slightly wrong, because Toby and others have been clouding my mind with visions of what the correct phraseology is. But pro bono isn't a substitute. It's not for a properly funded and properly functioning legal aid system. That, of course, is right. It must complement it. Apparently, the Attorney General had a wonderful formula last night that I can't remember and that I'm not going to get right. But look on Twitter, because she got it right and she absolutely nailed it last night. It is no substitute, but it is a complement. And that is absolutely right. And the attorney was right to emphasize that point last night as well. Can I just say one or two words about my role now. I'm actually now an employed barrister. I had been a self-employed barrister. I was at Chambers on circuit, on the Western Circuit throughout my time as a barrister, 12 years before I was elected to Parliament. I'm now an employed barrister, and it would be remiss of me as Solicitor General if there are students out there either beaming in and listening or actually here this evening. If you are interested in a government legal career, either for a small period of time or for the whole of your career, then do look it up. The Attorney General was in the government legal department for 17 years. She saw an amazing array of work, whilst I was in private practice seeing some rather ordinary run-of-the-mill cases, very interesting, very exciting, but run-of-the-mill cases. The attorney was seeing cases that were hitting the front pages day in, day out as a government lawyer. You'll all have seen the Iraq inquiry and others. The attorney was there and her work was on the front pages. So if you're thinking of a career and you're not already embedded elsewhere, then do think about a government legal career. And finally, can I say this? Thank you so much for being here this evening and supporting this event. Thank you for what you do in supporting Pro Bono Week. And I really look forward to the panel's discussion this evening. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for that, Michael. Much appreciated. So moving on to the panel discussion for the evening, just a couple of housekeeping points before we get started. We definitely encourage questions this evening, and we're going to save a little bit of time after the panel discussion for those questions. So please do make a note and keep all of those burning questions until the end. Also, we will be ending with some networking, some great canapes and drinks. So please do stick around to chat amongst yourselves and with us as well. We look forward to meeting you all at the end. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the panel members. So sort of going along the end, we have Luke Richardson, Senior Associate at Baker McKenzie in the Disputes team. We have Jonathan Quant, Senior Associate at Clifford Chance. We have George Fay, RPC, Associate in the Litigation team, and Elizabeth Walsh of 4 Stone Buildings. So I'm going to allow them each to touch on their own sort of pro bono experiences and to introduce how they first got involved in pro bono in a moment. But before I do that, I just wanted to sort of set out a little bit about the discussion tonight. So as you're aware, the theme for this evening is a celebration of pro bono. And within that, we really want to touch on the importance of pro bono work within the legal sector and its ability to transform communities, as well as how it works alongside the justice system, as Michael rightly indicated. In addition, we want to sort of touch on the tangible impact that pro bono can have to communities, to individuals, to our clients, before looking at sort of what challenges pro bono initiatives are facing. We all do a lot of pro bono work and what challenges we've seen. And finally, we're going to end with some practical tips as to how each of you as young lawyers who hopefully are very interested in pro bono work, maybe you do some already, or you're just looking to get more involved. So we want to give you some practical tips as to sort of how you can get more involved with these initiatives, and also how you can use that pro bono work to really drive your careers forward. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our panelists. I'll turn to Luke first. It would be great if you could just give us a sense of how you got involved in pro bono work to start with.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So as Lauren said, I'm a litigator at Baker McKenzie. My first foray into pro bono was way back when I was a trainee, and I would go along to a pro bono clinic in East London that our firm worked with, and you would go probably once a month. I think it was a Tuesday night, and you would, with the team of lawyers who were there, you would deal with whatever cases had come through the door. It might be 4 people, it might be 50 people, and you would deal with all sorts of legal complaints, some of them factually complicated, some of them legally complicated as well, often with people who'd never spoken to a lawyer before, spoke English as maybe their second or third language. Absolutely terrifying for me, trying to burn up on my sort of interview skills, but really, really rewarding and valuable as well. And Baker McKenzie, it's an international law firm, so we also have lots of pro bono clients, either one-off or panel clients, where we act for them in litigation, often with a human rights angle. And I've been lucky enough to get involved in some of those cases. And then we also have various connections with pro bono schemes that some of you will know, such as the Court of Appeal pro bono scheme and Pro Bono Connect, which is a great way of solicitors and barristers working together on pro bono matters.
Thanks. Good evening. I'm Jonathan Quant. I'm a senior associate in litigation at Clifford Chance. Very similar to Luke, I got involved in pro bono through a community legal advice clinic. I started shadowing there while I was still doing the legal practice course, the LPC, which back in my day was a full year-long course, which left plenty of time for getting involved in these kinds of things. Very, very similar. I was in Southwest London, but I would imagine if we were to really compare notes, we'd find that it's very much the same sorts of things coming through the door. People with disputes with their landlords, people with employment disputes. One of the first ones I came across was two gentlemen who decided they wanted to start growing marijuana in their attic and wanted advice on the tax implications. Fair to say we didn't get onto tax. I was about to say nipped that one in the bud, but leave that one there. So since then, I still supervise a group of trainees and junior associates at the clinics about once a month. I've also done a number of cases with the National Autistic Society, where we have a long-standing relationship with them, providing advocacy assistance for parents of children and young people who are in dispute with their local authorities about the educational provision for their children and to address their special educational needs. That's been immensely rewarding. It's a really interesting scheme in that you're involved on a sort of institutional level with the NAS, but actually day to day, you're looking at one family and generally one young person. And so you can really sort of see in a very tangible way, the way in which pro bono is assisting the individual. I think I'm going to pause there and hand over to George.
Good evening, everyone. My name is George Fay. I'm a commercial litigator with RPC. I think my desire to get involved in pro bono started before my training contract. After my LPC, I had a couple of years to wait, as most people do sometimes. I found myself as a housing advisor in a local authority on the South Coast, where my wife is from, charged with homelessness prevention. I was running triage clinics in the mornings, sometimes going to court. I remember vividly once, some tenants, their landlord hadn't told them that his property was being repossessed, and they turned up for help with us on the kind of last day when the order was going to be executed, got into the court next door to the council. They weren't successful. I had to run down the road to stop this woman's daughter getting home before she saw the tape across the door, hand the phone to her, and her mum spoke to her. They were all right, but a little bit of resource goes a very long way for people who are in quite desperate need. So when I joined Cripps in Kent, that's my first firm, I joined their pro bono committee. A couple of firms later, I'm now at RPC, and I'm on the pro bono committee again. Just found it very, very rewarding and enjoyable thing to do, as well as the fee earning work.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Elizabeth Walsh. I'm a commercial chancery barrister at Fourstone Buildings over in Lincoln's Inn. And I'm sort of the bar representative, I think, of the panel. So I first encountered pro bono work in a meaningful way through Advocate, but I was actually on the other side. So it was my first case as a tenant. I was instructed with a very senior, very good member of Chambers on a Court of Appeal case. So I thought, oh my God, this is great. I've really made it already. And it was a one day in the Court of Appeal, wigs, gowns, brilliant, felt really amazing, really like this is where I've arrived, you know. And the guy on the other side was only 2 years more senior than me. And I think he was 2 years call, 3 years call, something like that. Anyway, we got to the end of the day, judgment was given and he won. So he not only beat me, but also a very senior member of Chambers, has a Court of Appeal judgment in his name in which he wins. And he was doing it all pro bono, and I think he'd been instructed via Advocate. So I thought, oh, actually, maybe I should be doing some pro bono work through Advocate. Since then, have taken a few cases with Advocate. Haven't been in the Court of Appeal, unfortunately, but we're working on it. But it's been very rewarding, very interesting work. From a barrister perspective, I think really helpful because you're working with clients in a way you don't normally do. Usually, if your solicitors are any good, which these all are, they will deal with the client a lot of the time for you. And there is that disconnect between you and the lay client. When you do pro bono, a lot of the time that sort of middleman, as it were, is actually removed, and you're having to develop skills that you don't have, and understand the way that things work in a way that normally solicitors actually protect you from. So it's really helpful for developing your own practice as well. So I would say absolutely get involved with pro bono. And if you are a barrister, then Advocate is a great way to do that. And I should also just give a quick shout out to Sham, who is head of casework at Advocate. He's on the front row here. I'm singling him out in a red tie. He will be around for drinks later. So if you do want to find out more, obviously I'm very happy to speak to anyone, but he's probably much more knowledgeable than me about it.
Well, thank you to the panel for sharing your very varied experiences. Moving on from there, it might be interesting to think a little bit about how lawyers can use pro bono to act as advocates for change. So Jonathan, I'll turn to you for this one. Do you have any thoughts on how pro bono work can be used for those purposes?
Yeah, I mean, particularly as this is an evening and a session for junior lawyers, and there may well be some very junior lawyers, I think I'd start by saying, don't worry, that doesn't have to be the goal, and it certainly doesn't have to be the starting point to go out and change the world. Changing the world is a very, very big thing. Changing one person's life is enough. But thinking about this point, as lawyers, we are well remunerated, some more so than others, but against a baseline of society as a whole, we are well remunerated. And I think that does shield us from some of the harsher realities of things like the cost of living crisis at the moment. You go to the shops, you notice things are more expensive, but I would like to hope that there are no lawyers having to make the difficult decisions about heat, light, or food, for example. And we're lawyers, we're intelligent people, we can understand these things on an intellectual level. But I do think that until you have sat in a room with a client who is facing those decisions, it's really quite difficult to grasp precisely what that means and the implications of it. And so actually being there on the ground, speaking to people and trying to find solutions and helping them out is, I think, the first step in that path towards being an advocate for change. And in my experience, what I've seen happen a lot is people go out and they maybe meet a client at a legal advice clinic, or they do a bit of pro bono work because they've got a few hours here or there. And then they get the bug. And then they start thinking, well, hang on a minute. How can I leverage my experience, my knowledge, my network, and take that little bit that I've done for that one client over there and start to move that onto the next stage? And as I say, it doesn't matter if people don't do that. Helping one client at a time is great. But for the people that want to, I think it becomes quite a natural thing. So I spoke earlier about the National Autistic Society. Just my own example, I did a few cases for the National Autistic Society. Through that, I was introduced to a school in Bow, a school called Phoenix, which is a special school for autism, one of, if not the biggest in the country. And I went and had a look around, and the head took me around, and it was the most awe-inspiring place I think I've ever been. The work that they were doing with children and young people with very, very complex needs. And because of my experience, I was asked to join the governing body of the school and then to sit as a trustee on a couple of their charities. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not, leading the charge on the things that they're doing, but I can add an extra perspective as a lawyer to these bodies that they were missing beforehand. And so in my own little way, I do feel like that's moved from helping one person, one family, to maybe helping a bit more of a community in the local area. And then they've opened a provision in Bangladesh. So it started to become a bit more international. And that was entirely a process of evolution. It wasn't something that certainly I was driving, but I think that is a way that these things do tend to sort of snowball quite a lot. And you can find yourself 5-10 years down the line doing things you never thought you'd be doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I suppose thinking about lawyers advocates for change, you could also think about how actually we could be driving change within our own law firms, for example, pushing our law firms to do more pro bono work and encouraging that attitude. And I wonder if, George, you could share any thoughts on that point.
Yeah, thank you. I think there is generally in the legal industry increased expectations from junior lawyers. You can't just have good quality work, good culture, ESG and pro bono and charitable work. There's an expectation that we should be doing more, which is really good. And I think law firms are wise to that, and they know that they need to up their game. And so I think, from a starting point in interviews, or when you join in a firm, what is your offering? What do you do with pro bono? What can I get involved with? And a lot of voices asking those questions, let those further up know that it's a matter of importance. And of course, when you get involved at any point, there's lots of ways to publicize the success internally or on LinkedIn or other ways, and to talk about it. Of course, lots of different law firms, some huge international firms may have very well organized outfits, do some fantastic work. It's quite enviable that a lot of us would like to be involved in. But there's a spectrum, and a lot of firms aren't there or anywhere close. And so I would want to address those, I suppose, tonight. I think it's important to know what other firms are doing, but to not get too hung up on that. I think probably most importantly, if you're in a firm and you wanted to be an advocate for the embrace of more pro bono work, I think you need to ask yourself, well, if I'm a partner, if I'm on a committee or a board, what might I be worrying about if I've got junior members wanting, or junior lawyers coming wanting to get more involved in this? And from the various firms I've been involved in, my experience, there's worry about capacity and drawing, hours away from the fee earning work that kind of keeps the lights on and keeps the salaries paid. Worries around risk. If you've got an internal risk team, they'll want to know, is this within our expertise as a firm? Are you trying to get involved in something that might be just a bit beyond your reach rather than just stretching you? Is there a partner who's willing and able to take on that work at that moment in time? You might want to do the legwork, but there needs to be someone who ultimately gives oversight. Might the firm be worried about committing to something that they might not be able to do long term? There's a potential embarrassment factor if you're committing the firm to other things. There could potentially be conflicts between some of the fee earning work, the commercial work, if you're like me, and perhaps some of the ideals of the individuals we want to represent. They might not be hard conflicts, but they might be ideological ones that you've got to think about. Have a think about internally what the technical issues that might stop you from doing pro bono work. Do you know how to open a matter that is kind of non-chargeable, but to the client, but might give you as a junior fee and a chargeable hours to be recorded and recognized? You might need to go and speak to your finance team about that. Just find out the practicalities. Hearts and minds, you need to find someone perhaps within the firm. Who are those individuals who actually you can bring on board, who can pass up to the right meetings, the right boards, your desires to do more work? And those of you, the junior colleagues, can you find someone who could be an advocate for you internally? How are you going to promote pro bono internally? Are you going to send another firm-wide email? Probably not going to be very happy with that. People might forget, you might be a nuisance. Screensavers are hard fought over for those kind of things. Could you build up a network of like-minded individuals on a committee or just in different departments that when an opportunity comes up, you can go out to them and they can target a smaller group of people? So, in terms of if you want to be someone who advocates change in the firm, I would suggest, well, look at where you are at the moment. What is your firm doing? You don't have to do it all, as Jonathan said. Think to yourself, well, what are other firms doing? What can we aspire to? Can we get some good ideas? But then rather than shooting for the moon, think to yourselves, well, what are the hurdles internally? What can I do to satisfy those who are going to sign off on this? That it's a good idea, that we've thought about what needs to be done, and we've proposed ways around that to make it something that can be endorsed. And I think from there you can start to set some realistic targets and build incrementally wherever you are.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I totally agree that, all of those things are so important, especially when trying to, in a law firm, attract potential trainees, other members of staff to join. It's all really important that you're able to think about this and push forward doing more pro bono work internally. I wonder, Elizabeth, if you have anything to add, sort of, as our representative from the bar.
Not much. Just to say, sort of from the perspective of a barrister, and obviously a self-employed barrister as well. I can't speak for employed barristers. I'm sure it might well be different. But for us, obviously, we don't have billable targets. We work on our own. We work for ourselves. It's a very different setup to being in a law firm. Different pressures. But really, that means that it's entirely up to you how much pro bono work you take, what you take, when you take. I mean, I have some friends who I recently asked, I'm doing this pro bono case. I'm a bit stuck on something. Have you done any pro bono work and you could help me? And he rather facetiously, I think, said, you couldn't pay me to do pro bono. To which I said, okay, not very helpful. I'll move on. But, there is a bit of an attitude from some people. I'm here to make as much money as I can, and I'm going to dedicate all my time to making money. To which I'd say, well, most barristers do have ups and downs in terms of their practice. You might have a bit of a quiet period, which is a great opportunity to take on a case. But just sort of taking from Jonathan's point earlier, I think it often starts in that way. You think, I've got a bit of free time, I might take on a case, have a look at the advocate case list, see what's available. And what ends up happening is you read into the case, you help out, you do the one discrete task you've been set, and you suddenly realize, I can actually maybe help this person, and I'm kind of invested in this person now, and I'm invested in their case, and I really think this bank is actually taking them for a ride, and I want to do something about it. And having spoken to other caseworkers at Advocate as well, they say this is a very common reaction. You're only given one task to do, but the barristers often come back and say, actually, please, can I carry this case on if possible? And as long as everyone's happy, then that is what ends up happening. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth and George, for those insights. I mean, of course, pro bono work is just one sort of piece of a much larger justice system puzzle. So I wonder maybe if I can ask Jonathan to sort of share some thoughts on how you sort of see pro bono work almost working alongside the justice system in that sense.
I mean, I think this general phrased it very nicely, albeit he was very humble and modest in his sort of self-assessment of that. We are doing pro bono work. We're a very small piece in a very large puzzle. There are things which we can absolutely do. Some of my corporate colleagues work very long term with charities, and they do all of their corporate work just as they would for a fee-paying client, in a way where, frankly, the legal aid sector probably can't help. But equally, there's an awful lot of stuff that we can't do. We lack the skill set. I may foray into a bit of education law here and there, but I'm not an education lawyer. I'm a commercial disputes lawyer, and we don't tend to get those at community legal advice clinics. There is also a real risk. We sit here in Middle Temple in the middle of London, and we think about the pro bono that we're all doing, and we congratulate ourselves and pat ourselves on the back, and rightly so. But we're not really helping people who need help in Doncaster, where I hail from, or Norwich, or Wakefield, or wherever it might be. The firms with the big pockets, the deep pockets, were here in London. And so we tend to focus on the people who are on our doorstep, and that's great, but it's bigger than that. And then I think the real thing that we cannot do, that the sort of legal aid sector and our colleagues working in that sector are a lot better at than we are, is we're not part of the communities we are working with and helping to the extent that we could be, and I would think should be. And I'll give an example of that. A few years ago, we took on a client who I'd met at a legal advice clinic. One of our trainees had interviewed the guy. He was a minicab driver. He'd been out and bought a new car because he wanted to work more, earn more for his family. And about 6 months later, he got a knock on the door from the police saying, "Terribly sorry, sir, the car you bought was stolen, so we'll have it back, please." And anyone who's recently come out of law school will think, aha, there's a case study about this. And in most of the case law about it, it's the rogue trader and you don't know who sold the car. He'd bought it from a garage. So we went off and we wrote to the garage and we said, you're probably in breach of contract here. And the reason I raised this one is my diary was really busy at the time, and I needed to meet with him face to face to speak to him, take a proof of evidence for a witness statement. And I invited him into our offices in Canary Wharf. And with the benefit of hindsight, I regret having done that, because I spoke to him later and he was absolutely terrified of coming to a 30-story ivory tower, well, glass and steel tower, and a guy half his age saying, "Can I get you some lunch? I'll just press this button and someone will bring it in," because that just wasn't his world. And I'm inviting him in and asking him to divulge all of his financial information, his family information, all of these really personal things he wants to provide for his family, and he's not able to because of the situation he finds himself in. And that was difficult for him, but I made him speak to me on my terms because that was easier for me. And I do regret that. And that's the problem with the big law firms. It's great the work we're doing, and we should be really proud of it, and we should celebrate it, but we need to think about the clients. And that, I think, is a way that the legal aid sector can really help in a way that we can't. They can be there on a more long-term basis, and they can work with people on their own terms.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's clear from what you've said that, you know, the pro bono work that we do can really go hand in hand with what the justice system has to offer. So turning a little bit to think about the tangible impacts of pro bono work for clients, for individuals, I wonder if, Luke, I can turn to you to sort of share some of your experiences.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think in terms of individual impact, I'm sure I don't need to convince anyone in this room that doing pro bono can be good for you, but you might have to persuade your supervisor or pupil master. I would say the main benefits are, well, you get exposure to a different area of law, perhaps an interesting area of law that you wouldn't come across in your daily practice. You get to meet interesting people, interesting clients. On bigger projects, you get to work with other people in your firm who you might not otherwise come across, which can be good, obviously, for your internal profile, and sometimes other clients as well. And we've worked on cases at Baker McKenzie where you partner with large corporate clients who want to do pro bono, have similar sort of goals as we do. And that's obviously a way of forging those relationships as well. And of course, I think it probably has to be said that if you're lucky enough to work at a firm, as I do, where pro bono work is counted as billable, then that's obviously good for your numbers as well. You know, the billable hour is what it is. We all have targets that we need to meet, and this is an extra way of doing that. I mean, in terms of the impact on the client, I think it can probably be analysed on the sort of the macro and the micro level. So in terms of the macro, obviously, if you're working on a big headline grabbing human rights case, then that's great. You know, you can benefit that litigant or that class of people who are affected by that case. You can hopefully establish a really helpful precedent for other people. But more on the micro level, I mean, I think this point's already been made, but if you're helping a individual at a legal advice clinic, for example, then you're obviously helping them with the most stressful thing in their lives at that moment, something that they've never really come across before. And often they just want someone, I mean, often in these cases, you don't even use your legal skills. You are just applying some common sense to a situation that's got completely out of hand as a result of, you know, both sides getting lost. And I mean, maybe I'll illustrate that by way of an example. I mean, I think I mentioned earlier the Court of Appeal pro bono scheme, in which you represent litigants in person who are applying for permission to the Court of Appeal to appeal a decision. And I remember doing one case a couple of years ago where the guy, and obviously by the time you get to the Court of Appeal, you've obviously been in the justice system for quite some time. And this guy had brought a claim. It had been dismissed, I think, for failing to comply with a deadline or something. Instead of appealing that decision or applying for relief from sanctions, he basically filed the same claim again in a different court, or possibly the same court, I can't remember. That had then been struck out as an abusive process. Instead of appealing that decision, he tried to judicially review the court that had made that decision. You know, this all made sense to him, but was wrong. That then got dismissed. So by the time it sort of landed on my desk, maybe 7 or 8 different judges had looked at this. You know, it probably didn't have merits on the substance, but a huge amount of judicial time, court resources had been spent on this case. And from the client's perspective, justice hadn't been served because he'd just been told no and no over and over again by different people for very arcane reasons to him. And no one had ever actually begun to engage with the merits of the dispute. So, all it really took is for someone to look at this and say, you should have filled in this form and you should have taken this procedural step. And the court staff would have, of course, tried to help him, but they're very busy and they're not his lawyers. They can't give him advice. And if, someone had got involved a bit earlier, it maybe wouldn't have got to that stage. And that's also true of the pro bono clinics where people are in dispute with the council about unpaid bills and, they're being chased by their mobile phone company over a bill they've already paid. And, they phone up and think it's been sorted out and then they get another demand through the post. And all it really takes is for someone to get on the phone to someone sensible at the company and, sort it out once and for all. So I think that obviously is a real impact that the kind of work that we all hope to do can have sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that you touched on was sort of working with other law firms in the instance that you mentioned. And I suppose that's another important thing to note, the importance of collaboration when it comes to pro bono work, whether that's with other law firms, whether that's with NGOs, charities, everybody working together to achieve some sort of common goal. So I wonder maybe if, Elizabeth, I could hand over to you to talk a little bit about that. I mean, I know somebody mentioned, Pro Bono Connect. So maybe that's one example, but yeah, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think taking on pro bono work as a baby junior barrister or a junior in a solicitor's law firm, it can actually be quite a daunting process because a lot of the time it's benefit of it, but it's also partly terrifying, is that you're probably doing work that's slightly above where you would be doing it if you were doing it in private practice. That's kind of part of the benefit of doing it, is you're put into situations you wouldn't otherwise be put into, but it can be quite scary. And I think it's really important to note, certainly from my own experience, that there's a lot of support available out there. So you might be taking on a case on your own, feeling slightly out of your depth, but it's important to note that collaboration is a really big part of it. So I took on a case recently with Advocate, and it was at a stage of litigation which I'm not normally involved in, or at least I haven't been involved in my very brief 3-year career. And I didn't really know what I was supposed to be doing. So I got in touch with the caseworker at Advocate and said, I understand that there's a possibility of being put in touch with some solicitors and having some solicitors being put on the record. Is that something that we could explore? And they very helpfully and very promptly did that, and had a very helpful call with the solicitors. And it just gave me a lot more support. And then we had a call with the client and so on. And there was like a big team of us then involved on this case. And it just meant that I knew that the advice I was giving was correct. And yeah, it was good for the client. And again, to put a bit of a selfish spin on it, it was good for me because it was a great experience. Normally, I don't know if people pursuing the bar are going into commercial or commercial chancery work, but a lot of the time you're in a council team of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people. You're the baby junior, you're the person who does the discrete tasks. You're not the person who's speaking to the solicitors. You're not the person who's speaking to the client, definitely not. And here you are all of a sudden plunged into that experience and having to sort of manage a lot of moving parts and really up your game, actually. So it's important to note that support is there through things like Pro Bono Connect, and to definitely make the most of them, and to not be put off taking on pro bono cases because you're a bit anxious about that aspect of it, but also remembering that it's really great in terms of your own advancement. Another point to make just very briefly is that judges really love people who are doing pro bono work. They I don't want to say they go easy on you, but they sort of do a little bit. They really appreciate the fact that you're doing this for free. If turn up to a hearing, or you do one of the various programs that are available, like CLIPS, which is the Chancery Bar Litigant in-person support scheme, is what it's officially called. It's basically the interim applications court. And again, from the selfish side, it's a great opportunity to be getting in front of judges, getting Chancery judges to know who you are at a very early stage of your career, and to have a big tick next to your name as somebody who does pro bono. So I'd say a lot of collaboration from all sides, all seniorities, and the support is definitely out there. So do make the most of it.
Thank you. And George, Jonathan, Luke, anything to add from sort of a law firm perspective on the collaboration point?
Yeah, as I've got the mic. There are a lot of really fantastic organizations that are formally organized to put lawyers in touch with people who need advice. But there's also ways to make informal connections and collaborate with other organizations. A couple of years ago, I really wanted to find some pro bono work for people who were potential or actual victims of modern slavery. And where do you start when you're a commercial litigator? I found the Anti-Trafficking Labour Exploitation Unit in London, just made myself known to them. They happened to have a charity working in that sphere who wanted some help. More recently, another charity called Unseen went to this unit with some individuals who worked in the caregiving sector who had been wrongly charged or passed on fees, sponsorship fees. They come from abroad and they'd been passed on to them, and they had these loans that they were being chased for. Small claims court claims issued against them. A lot of money for them. They were sending back money to children and family back in Zimbabwe. Turns out that someone at that unit remembered that I'd been in touch, put the person at Unseen in touch with me. This was right up our street. This was, a debt claim. And we were able to get both claims dismissed just recently. And for these individuals, they were terrified. And they felt really, really empowered. But the nice thing was it took a couple of years, but I think if you want to go for something, if there's something you're interested in, as lawyers, I think whatever we do, there'll be someone out there with a need for our skill set, however much we think that those two worlds might not collide. So don't be shy in putting your name out there and letting people know you're available. It might take a while, but you can start to strike up some relationships, which is how lawyers get work generally.
Thank you very much. I mean, it sounds like an excellent initiative with a pretty incredible end result. So fantastic. We've discussed a lot in this panel discussion so far about sort of the impact of pro bono work, the successes, and it's probably also worth us touching on sort of the challenges that pro bono work can face. So I'll turn over to Luke now to discuss a little bit about sort of the hurdles which have to be overcome.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think George actually covered a lot of ground of this already. I mean, there's very mundane things like, how do you open a matter number if you work for a law firm? Who's the partner who's going to supervise all of this? There's harder questions when it doesn't fall neatly into an existing practice area in the firm systems. I mean, one of the things I found at a really large solicitors firm when I first started is you just didn't really know what was going on. So there's lots of people in the firm, both in London and internationally, who were doing sort of really great pro bono work, but we didn't necessarily know what was going on. And we've got people like Lauren who now coordinate that for us. So it's all sort of handled centrally, and we ensure that the right people are put on the right matters for the right projects. So if you are working at or going to work at a firm or I guess a chambers that doesn't have that kind of system, then by all means suggest that to people. And when someone says, I'm going to make this more organized for you, you find that you very rarely get told, no, don't bother. People say, thank you very much for doing all of that. I guess one of the main challenges realistically is, just we're also busy. And I do find that pro bono matters often tend to grow in a way that you don't necessarily expect with a billable matter, where the client's worried about the bottom line on the financial statement and all that sort of thing. And the last case I did with Pro Bono Connect, we got involved because a barrister was acting pro bono for a client and needed a law firm on board because they needed to draft a witness statement for an application. And for various reasons, it became necessary for us to come on the record as well. And you've got to go and then convince the partner, I know this is a bigger commitment than we originally signed up for, but I think it would be good for these reasons. And luckily in that case, no opposition from the powers that be. And it meant that we got to, develop this relationship with this barrister, give some of our lawyers courtroom experience, oral advocacy work, which we sometimes have to do for our billable clients, but not very often. So it's always good to get that kind of practice. And yeah, the benefits do eventually come. I mean, I've had this long running case that I've been working on for my entire career with one barrister, and we've been out abroad to the hearings a couple of times. I've got to know each other really well. And occasionally people will say, are you still working on that case? Is it not? Yeah, well, yeah. And then about a year ago, he referred some actual billable work to us because they needed some, I think the solicitors were being replaced on a case, and he thought it would be a great case for us. So you know, I sort of said, haha, 10 years, but we finally got some billable work out of this, and nobody has ever questioned my involvement in that case ever again. Yeah, I mean, those are the sort of things that you go through, but yeah, I would say no matter how junior you are, don't ever let those sort of put you off.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the sort of, you never know where the cases are going to take you, and
Exciting.
it is exciting, also very time consuming, but in a great way, very rewarding. So thank you very much. And I suppose on a more practical level, you know, as this is a junior lawyers event, we probably should think about, from a junior lawyer's perspective, how you can get more involved in pro bono work, and really why you should get involved in more pro bono work, not just because, you know, it's a great thing to do, it's really rewarding, but from sort of a career development perspective. Of course, it can be a really useful tool, sometimes even more so than billable work. So as our sort of more junior members of the panel, I'm going to hand over to Elizabeth and George. So maybe Elizabeth, do you want to kick things off?
In terms of practical ways to get involved as a barrister, and particularly as a commercial chancery barrister, really there are three things that I've got involved with and that I definitely recommend. The first is advocate, which I've spoken about quite a bit tonight. Very happy to speak to anyone who's interested after the discussion is over at drinks, and obviously Sham, I'm sure, will be very happy to respond to any questions as well. It's just really well run. Every week you get a weekly email basically, which sums up various cases that are available. It says what seniority is required. So it might say 3 years call or 10+ years call if it's a particularly difficult issue. It says what the task is. So it might say, you know, high court hearing or something like that. And it often gives an estimate of how long they expect you to spend on it as well. So it's a really, really useful tool. So sign up to those weekly emails as soon as you possibly can, and make sure you check them because there's so much good work out there. Another thing I should mention is COIN, COIN, which is Company Insolvency Pro Bono scheme, which some of you might already be aware of if you're on the bar course at City University. It's run at the Winding Up Court every Wednesday morning. It's exactly the kind of work that you do as a baby junior at a chancery or commercial chancery set, assisting, advising people, and then representing them in court as well. At the Winding Up Court, it's wigged, it's gowned, it's very, very glamorous. So definitely get involved with that. And then the third thing to mention, which I've already mentioned as well, is CLIPS, which is the Chancery interim applications pro bono scheme. Might be something to do if you're not already in practice, once you're in practice after a year or so, but do keep an eye out for it if you are in the Chancery space, as people say.
Thanks. I'll touch on some kind of career development benefits, which raises a kind of philosophical question of whether there's such a thing as a selfless good deed. And I think the answer to that is no, because whenever you do something good or kind, you always benefit, as does everyone else. I think depending on, you know, the kind of work you do, I live in a commercial world. Pro bono, I think, keeps me a bit sane. I perhaps shy away in the commercial world because at the end of the day, it's only about money. I don't tell my clients, but you know, it's usually not necessarily someone's life on the line, or, you know, other people I appreciate work, you know, very personal areas of law. But if you can do something that's outside of the norm, which, you know, perhaps a greater degree of appreciation, I think it can just be a bit of a kind of cleanse your palate from a working perspective. I think pro bono might give you a bit more client contact than you might otherwise get with the fee-paying clients. You might have someone looking who's in charge who might think, well, I'll let you run with this one a bit more. You can develop those soft skills. You know, if you join a pro bono committee, all of a sudden you're on a committee, you're having to manage your time, you're having to interact with people, listen to them, interject, you know, appropriately, and I'd give you thoughts. And these are things which are fantastic as your career develops. You take on more, as has been said by Luke, you take on more, you're very busy. So as juniors, we tend to have to, you know, turn up, do the work, and everything else is kind of other people's problems. But as you get more senior in your career, you will have to juggle the kind of more extracurricular, non-fee paying work with the fee earning work, sorry. And so I think pro bono is a good place to learn those skills. And finally, as I think you've probably gathered from the experiences, you get to learn things that are either on the fringes or completely outside of your area of expertise, which not only is kind of fun, but you never know when it might come in useful, either in your personal life or in your work life. So lots of good reasons to do it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. That feels like a good note to end our panel discussion on. So thank you to all of the panel for their insightful comments. Definitely given me a lot of food for thought. I hope it's also offered the rest of you the same, not least in terms of, you know, the impact that pro bono work has for the community, for individuals, but also how we can sort of harness pro bono work to almost to our own advantage. I mean, yeah, I no selfless good deed. I quite like that phrase, but you know, to help build our careers, help learn new skills, etc. So yeah, thank you very much to the panel, and thank you again to Michael for speaking at the start. And so now I'd really like to hand over to you all, to the floor for any questions you might have. Oh, we have a couple. Yes. Do we have a microphone? Okay.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Should I? Yeah, I mean, it would happen all the time at the legal advice clinic. That was your experience as well, because you would often get someone who got a very loud voice. It's fine. Who would sort of come with, for example, a very complicated, I don't know, dispute about whether or not they're getting the right unemployment benefit or disability allowance or something like that, and you know, obviously very black letter area of the law and not something that you instantly knew off the top of your head. And depending on how busy the clinic was, you would sort of sit there and do some research while they waited if you wanted to sort of check what you thought was the answer. But for most clients, you would say, well, you know, I'll have to go and look at this. It's, you know, very complicated. It's quite difficult. I'd need to come back to you with a considered response. And most clients are totally fine with that. They understand it. Some of them like to be told that this is a complicated query and it's not something, you know, they're not stupid. They're not wasting their energy on something that is really solvable. And the clinic would allow you to go away and come back in a couple of days' time with the answer. So it's like billable work as well, right? Don't be ever pressured into giving the client an answer on the spot if you're not sure what that answer is. You know, people always respect you if you say, I need to have a think about that for a while.
I mean, I just add one thing to that, which is you can go away, you can research it, but the other thing is you have a great network. I'm sure everyone in here has a network, and if you don't know, you might know someone who knows, or you'll know someone who knows someone who knows. Because in my experience, every question for a pro bono client is unique for that client, but most of them someone's heard before, or at least they've heard something very close to it.
I think we had a question at the back, and then I'll come back. Yep. Sure.
Lauren, forgive me for hijacking that, but my apologies. I've got to go and take the adjournment debate in the House of Commons. I'd hoped to be able to stay to circulate afterwards. Can I say what a fantastic discussion that was this evening, a real insight into the advantages of doing pro bono work, the selfish and the selfless advantages. And it was a real insight. And for those of you who haven't yet undertaken pro bono work, do just throw yourself into it and get stuck in. And my sincere apologies. I've got to run.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Who, around here, okay.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, is it common for law firms to offer pro bono lawyer roles without doing something else? So somebody whose whole job would just be to do pro bono work?
Yeah, I mean, so we have a pro bono and community outreach team. There's probably 5 or 6 people in that. I think it's fair to say a lot of the work that they are doing is managing and orchestrating the pro bono projects for the fee earners to be involved with. But I've certainly come across other law firms who, I mean, there are one or two who have a sort of spin-off, smaller pro bono firm within a firm. So there are people doing that. Simmons and Simmons used to, I might be slightly out of date, but they used to fund a role, a sort of paid role for someone at a legal advice clinic to be there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So they weren't strictly employed by Simmons, but they were being funded by Simmons. So there are lots of ways that firms are doing it. I don't know if anyone's got.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to? Yeah, I mean, our firm didn't used to have that at all, but we now have a pro bono department, I suppose. So if you're a trainee, you can do one of your 4 6-month seats in the pro bono team, working for a senior associate whose full-time job is to do pro bono work and manage all of the different projects that the team are doing. I mean, that's a relatively new innovation for us, I think, a couple of years or so.
Yeah, that's right. And the sort of pro bono trainee, as we deem to call them, they also get the opportunity to do secondments to pro bono, to charities, essentially, who are looking for legal support. So yeah, it's a really great opportunity. Were there any others?
What was the one thing you wish that someone told you at the beginning of your career relating to taking on pro bono work?
Very good question. I know what mine is because I heard it this evening. It's when you're doing advocacy for on a pro bono, tell the judge that you're doing it pro bono, because you will get shouted at less than you might otherwise do for making a silly point. I wish I'd known that earlier.
I'm afraid I have the counterpoint. I did once tell a judge in an SEN tribunal that we were there pro bono, and she took against us quite a lot. I think she looked at us as having come down from our ivory tower to interfere in the workings of her court. I think for me, it would be to, and I mean, it's a bit of a, it almost goes without saying, but just take the opportunities when they come, because you never know where they'll lead. So, you know, turning up tonight, you'll speak to people after this and you may make a connection or two, and it may be 10 years, but who knows what might happen in 10 years with someone that you met this evening. And similarly, you know, take on a pro bono client, take on a case, do whatever it is that you do, and then just see where it takes you.
Yeah, no one really said anything to me about pro bono work when I kind of started my career, and I think that's the thing that I wish someone had said it. If someone said, you know, this is what we do. Do you want to get involved? And perhaps if we could get to the point where, you know, more people who are established lawyers, you look at those who are training or more junior lawyers, say, come and get involved in a bit of this. I wish I've had more experiences and I suppose more of a pro bono mentor, perhaps. I suppose that's a bit of a wish for the future, maybe.
I think I would say don't keep putting it off until you think you're ready. As we spoke about earlier, it can be a bit daunting, especially if you're the only person on the case, or it's something that's maybe feels a bit out of your league or your ability at that stage. We've spoken a lot about the support that's available. And I would say just throw yourself in, get involved, get stuck in, and work it out afterwards.
Any other questions?
It's the clinking at the back of the room too distracting.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I think we'll wrap up there then. But thank you again, everyone, to our panelists and to you, the audience, for coming this evening. And yes, please do stick around for some networking, some drinks, which are out now, and some delicious canapes. So thank you very much, everyone.